Good morning. I'm delighted to introduce you to a guest of mine, Michelle Harvey. She's a great chef and a great nutritionist, and I've invited her to talk a little bit about a couple of new projects she's on. And so welcome,
Thanks
Michelle.
a lot. Thank you.
So, obviously we've known each other for a couple of years, and actually knowing your mom as well, even before that. But I'm delighted that you're here with us. Michelle, we're here today to talk a little bit about the difference between paleo and keto. As you know, for the last 10, 15 years, I've been very keen on the paleo diet. And obviously, I think for our audience, we can explain a little bit about the difference between a paleo diet and a keto diet. I have been tremendously impressed with the rapid success and evolution of the keto diet across, not just here in the Middle East, but across the whole world, as people are finding the benefits of keto. If you'd like to point out perhaps a little bit the differences between these two and what you as a chef need to do to sort of create great paleo as well as great keto meals.
So paleo and keto are quite similar in a lot of senses, in the sense that they're both very much focused on whole foods ingredients and good quality fats, good quality protein, things like grass-fed meat, wild-caught fish, and then trying to avoid things like all the grains, so oats, barley, rye, wheat products. But the way in which they're different is, as you can see from the slide here, it's 70% fat is what you're trying to aim for with the ketogenic diet. And that combined with the method of intermittent fasting also, which is maybe something that we'll talk about, but it's very effective when it comes to weight loss and then reducing your blood sugars, much more so than paleo. And so the interesting thing about paleo, I've actually been paleo for about 6 years now, 6 or 7 years. And when I initially went paleo, I actually ended up putting on weight, which was kind of not
putting on weight.
Yes, which is not what I was expecting. And the reason being was because I just ate far too many nuts. And I used to substitute bread with nut bread. I used to substitute a grain granola with nut granola, and then I would make all of my cakes from almond flour and things like that. And you just end up, eating
just too many carbs coming in still, even with the nut flours and things. So, I mean, I've always thought of paleo as being a more maintenance diet, because you probably can eat up to 100 grams of carbs. But I know for the keto diet to work, many people have to get their carbs to 20 or 30 grams.
Yeah, especially if you're not exercising, then it's even less.
Right.
Or moving and
And obviously the intermittent fasting, as you'd mentioned, has a tremendous positive effect in getting people into keto and keeping them in keto. What about the, I know you're working on an interesting project back in Chicago next month.
Yes.
Do you want to say something about the so-called self-heating meals?
Yes. So I'm working on a project with Keto Ready Hot, based in Chicago, and we're creating a line of self-heating keto meals. The focus is on keto and also some lectin-free recipes, which is really important for people with autoimmune disease and these kind of things. And we're really focusing on high quality ingredients and just...
I think these will be very convenient for people at home. And, I know many of my clients, a lot of them are single, they don't cook, they've got pretty busy lives. And I understand that, with the self-heating meal, I think you just press it at the bottom and it self-heats.
Yeah.
And so it takes 5 or 6 minutes, and you can basically also store these at home, so you can take them out when you need them, or if you go on a hiking trip or a biking trip, you can take a couple with you. So I do see a very important role for some of these
and
kind of
people in
self-heating.
offices or just any kind of scenario where you don't have access to a fresh meal. It's definitely a much better alternative than fast food or a lot of the other things. So.
Can you say something a little bit about the actual when you make up a keto meal versus a paleo meal, what are you looking at doing in terms of getting the right macronutrient content that you've talked about? Where do you get the high fat from? I mean, what are good quality high fats that you can use?
Well, there's one of the main differences actually between keto and paleo is that keto people often allow some dairy in their meals, but it has to be high quality from grass-fed cows, and then also just focusing on the A2 cows, as you
A2 milk, right?
Exactly, like
right.
as you mentioned. But another way is just adding really good quality cooking oils to your dishes. So things like ghee is amazing. A lot of the ghee from India is actually made with buffalo, not with cow, which is really great. It has even less ghee only has small trace amounts of lactose, but then buffalo ghee is even less allergenic than the cow ghee. So in those kind of ways, and things like avocado oil, cooking with butter, all of these, the ways in which you can saute vegetables and the oil that you use for that is important in
very different from what we've been told over the last 30 years about how dangerous these so-called saturated fats and the dangers of LDL cholesterol.
Yeah.
I think that myth has been finally put to bed over the last year or so.
I haven't heard many people talking about low fat recently, which is good. Yeah.
Okay, great. So what's coming up is obviously self-heating keto and paleo meals, which have lectins or no lectins.
Yes.
And lectins, as you point out, is a no-no for people with autoimmune disease. And autoimmune disease, as we know, is now affecting 1 in 4 people. So obviously, if they're going to choose one of these self-heating meals and they know they've got an autoimmune disease, they can basically get the lectin-free variety.
Yes, So that lectin-free, it's things like nightshade vegetables, eggplants, peppers, tomatoes. It can be quite tricky, and I know that, for people deciding to go lectin-free, it's sort of almost like deciding to go paleo 7 years ago. Like there wasn't a single paleo product out there. You couldn't go and buy a paleo granola bar or paleo, it just didn't exist. And I think that's kind of the stage that lectin-free is in now.
I mean, one of the interesting thing is the paleo, which, comes out of Africa in a way, but they never actually excluded the deadly nightshade family, because I don't think even several years ago the paleo community didn't really quite understand, I think, that lectins, tomatoes, bell peppers, chilies, these kinds of things, perhaps were not as good for you as they thought they were. So I think there's also a gradual movement even in the paleo community away from some of the lectin containing foods.
Yes.
Yeah. So Michelle, you were mentioning about the transition. One of the problems you had was obviously when you substituted, you started adding too many nuts, which is a bit of a no-no. You can have some nuts, maybe a handful or so, but you can't be eating all the breaded.
Kilos of nuts.
Yeah, exactly. So any other issues with transitioning into the paleo?
I think at the time I did it, it was a lot more difficult in the sense that there weren't any products available, like you were saying, so you couldn't buy a paleo granola, for example. But I think getting your head around, I know a lot of people have issues, for example, with eating savory things for breakfast. They like to eat sweets for breakfast, right? It's what a lot of us grew up on, eating
cornflakes and a
cereal
banana
with sugar, and orange juice. So I think getting your head around that, and also for keto, is really, being able to eat eggs for breakfast, or eggs and salmon, or just something savory is definitely an issue that some people have. But once you get your head around intermittent fasting, actually you find breakfast quite an easy meal to skip over.
Actually, while we're on that, my good friend Tarak, I want him to come up, because Tarak is the CEO of Mad Talks, which is a really interesting sort of thing that's spreading rapidly around the world. And I'm delighted, Tarak, that you're here, because you've just transitioned, I think, over the last few weeks into keto. So why don't you give us a few words of wisdom, what you found with the transition with the keto diet?
Yes, certainly. I was inspired when we were recording this session just over 2 weeks ago, and I sat there thinking, oh my God, so what am I doing? And it sounded quite simple because I'd done the paleo diet,
Right.
and that helped me to lose well over 15, no, it was less, it was about 12 kg about 4 or 5 years ago. So now I sort of, and I heard, well, hang on, this is a little bit yesterday, and this is like a bit of today, and going into tomorrow.
This is paleo on steroids.
This is paleo on steroids. So now I'm on paleo on steroids. So I saw that and I thought to myself, hang on, this can be done. In other words, I can build it into my life. And I think that's one of the most important things that I initially saw. The 8-16 intermittent fasting, very convenient. I eat around 7 o'clock and then I have breakfast at around 11ish. So that's working. And
for breakfast, what, just a cup of coffee or something?
no, breakfast I'm having a couple of boiled eggs.
You are?
And a coffee or a tea.
Is that at 11 o'clock?
About
when
11 o'clock.
Okay,
Yes,
that's
yeah,
good.
that's my first break.
Yeah, okay.
And this morning I had a green juice which had broccoli, celery, ginger, etc., and a couple of boiled eggs. So I've had that. Now the first week was brilliant. I felt lighter, I felt energetic, and I was just thinking I'm going to fade, and I didn't at all. So that was brilliant. The second week has been flatter. Now, in the last 2 weeks and 2 days, I haven't had any desserts of any kind, 0 carbs. You know, the refined carbs. I'm sure I'm getting carbs through my vegetables and so on.
Yeah.
I've eaten dal once, only thinking that maybe that's not allowed, so I wanted to check. And initially for the first 2 or 3 days I was having nuts, and then I've been going online and checking out, so I've reduced the nuts down literally to a small handful because I thought that I might overdo that.
Yeah.
And then I only do between breakfast and dinner
Right.
sometime in the afternoon. So I'm not snacking, I'm not
Right.
hungry, I'm not fading, my energy levels are
Right.
good. So overall experience has been good, but
Great.
where does one go from here?
So, I mean, I think you've experienced a lot of the early, signs and symptoms of going into keto. And, for a lot of people, I tell them, don't worry about standing on a scale for the first few weeks. But just like you've noticed, you have better mental clarity. You basically feel a little lighter. Your pants start fitting you a little better. So, all this and less bloating and things like that. So these are the natural things. One of the cautionary things that I've mentioned to you, I think in the past, was don't be shy to drink more fluids and also add more salt to the diet, because the so-called keto flu that some people talk about, where you have symptoms very much like having the flu, is really avoided by just adding more fluids and some extra salt on your meal. So that's something you should do. But I think the real benefits, now that you've sort of adapting to the keto, you're going to be finding it easier and easier to stay with it. I was shocked, for instance, the Virta study, which I often refer to, that they had nearly a 93% compliance when diabetics went on just a keto diet, and they weren't doing intermittent fasting either, but just on the keto diet, 93% of people were able to, which is, in my line of work, is unheard of, for people to be like that. So I'd encourage you just to stay with it, and you'll start noticing the kilos dropping off probably a lot faster than they did even with the carb diet that you succeeded on.
I'm not insulin resistant or diabetic and stuff, so for me it was more maintenance of and enhancing quality and lifestyle longer term. What I wanted to ask you, Michelle, is that hard push for people like me who are very goal oriented is easy. I can do it for 2 weeks, I can do it for 2 months because I know I'm working towards a goal. How do you maintain that as a chef? I mean, how do I need to rechange my sort of what I buy on a daily basis? Because that to me longer term will be a challenge, I think.
Yeah, I think one thing is sort of just doing a giant pantry clean out at the beginning of the process, and actually just getting rid of things that halfway through the afternoon you might just know that there are those biscuits there or something in the cupboard.
So do you actually do sort of like 6 or 7 set meals in other words, literally train me or my maid in terms of these 5, 6, 7 set meals? So when I was doing my paleo, I was having Thai green curry with coconut milk because I wasn't taking milk. So that was one, and I started with zoodles,
Yeah.
or spaghetti with. So I was putting my vegetables as a base. So we trained the person, and then she was basically mixing and matching those 4, 5, 6 things. So it helped me sustain myself.
Yeah.
My concern is that sure I can resist it. You know, you can use energy and willpower. But the moment you let go, it goes back to your old habits. So creating new habits, I need a new formula.
Yeah.
Can you help us with that?
Well, I think it's interesting you say that, because I think with habit setting, it's an effort for a set period of time, and then after that it becomes effortless. So I think, for example, one thing I've been doing, this is actually unrelated to keto, but I've been trying to not look at my phone when I wake up in the morning immediately. And I really want to turn it off airplane mode and look at my emails and look at WhatsApp and all of that. And for the first couple of weeks, it was really, I was just like, I want to turn it, okay, no. And now it's just effortless, I don't think about it. And I think it's just repeating a habit, because like you said, as soon as you have to exert willpower and effort, it's that energy that's gone out of you that is after a while becomes tiring, and you want to move into the effortless realm where you no longer think about it. So
I think it's a good point what you mentioned. I think the magic number of days from the behavioral point of view is 21 days. But I think that this effortlessness of habit can easily be done, also because of the tremendous satiety that you get from a keto, because you're not thinking all the time. And so the real trick is, if I summarize keto in a nutshell, is to essentially, besides the high fat, moderate protein, low carbs, is to avoid, all grains, all sugar, and a lot of these, adulterated polyunsaturated fatty, the oils. So, coconut, ghee, as Michelle mentioned, these are the big ticket items. And always buy live kind of foods when you go to the grocery store. Nothing in packets and bottles and tins. They always say shop on the outside, not on the aisles where all that stuff is. So you go on the outside. But I think you're off to a great start, and I think you're practically there with your habits. You do this for a couple of weeks, I suspect you're going to do really, really well.
Super, thank you. One more thing in terms of habit change, because again, for the viewers, I think it's quite important, it was visualization rather than willpower. I visualized myself healthier, visualized myself lighter. I got some very, very early results in terms of feeling better. So immediately you get motivated. And therefore, why would you break it? It didn't make any sense. It wasn't a diet. Psychologically, it's not what I don't do. It's actually what I do. It's a complete shift in the brain. In other words, it's not that, I don't eat carbs. No, I eat these fresh vegetables, or I eat eggs, or I eat nuts. So mentally, I literally just shifted myself and saying, I don't need to do this in a negative way. So everything I'm doing is positive affirmation, quick results, feeling better, visualizing
and
health and happiness.
I think those quick results is so central to the keto. I mean, I'm shocked. In the medical literature, they show that being on a keto diet just for 1 week can actually reverse 30% of fat in a person's liver, which I just find astounding. So you can imagine what's happening inside, and then what's happening, and subjectively and objectively over time what happens. So very, very interesting.
So I'm a live living example of his work and his inspiration, and hopefully with yourself we'll get some inspiration in terms of how we can build that. I'm mentally very strong, so I can do it, but there are lots of people who need help.
Yeah, but doing the recipes, as you said, is really, I think, choosing meals that you like. And then that's another thing that, I try and do with the keto coaching, is actually ask people, what do you like eating? Not just saying, here are some recipes, because then people are eating something that's just not what they would normally eat, and then that's another hurdle. So if someone says, I really enjoy a ginger biscuit at 4 p.m. every day, then I can give them a keto version of that, because just these tiny little things that you can give people can really just stop them feeling like they've fallen off the bandwagon. Because when you fall, I think you can fall quite hard and think, I cheated today, I might as well just go and do this. And so avoiding that.
I think another good example, though, and Tarak alluded to it earlier, is that my friend Blake, who's a psychologist, told me it's not so much if there's a will, there's a way. It's the other way around. If there's a way, there's a will.
Yeah, exactly. So
I
giving
think
solutions.
that's what we you know, and what you're both mentioning is if you have the way, the will's not that important. You will succeed.
You want to minimize the will
Yeah.
because otherwise it's just overwhelming. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, just after this these sessions today from 12 o'clock, I'm leading the day for Gulf food.
Ah.
So guess what? I'm just going to go there, ready and loaded with this,
Good.
and I'm sort of presenting to hundreds of people there, and
Good.
basically
You've
we're
got
flying the flag.
excellent, excellent. Well,
Amazing.
nice to have you, Michelle, and
Yes, thank
always
you.
a pleasure to talk
you.
with you, Tarak.
you
Thanks
very
very
much.
much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Michelle.
you.